Hello everyone, Jesse Drever here, the Coordinator of Community Development at Leisure Networks. Coming to the end of the calendar year, sports clubs and community organisations are reaching dates when they would typically be holding their in-person annual general meetings. However, due to the COVID crisis that we've all been through this year, a number of social distancing restrictions have been implemented. So what can clubs do to adapt with their AGMs? I am lucky to be joined by Paul Gray, Principal at Harwood Andrews, who are a leading legal firm and valued partner of ours at Leisure Networks. Paul, thanks for joining me.
G'day, Jesse. Good to see you.
Good to see you too. We're lucky enough to have Paul with us today to present some of his top tips for incorporated associations to consider in preparing for their AGM. So, Paul, in the current climate, what would be your main recommendations for clubs when it comes to considering their annual general meetings?
Sure thing. Well, thanks, Jesse. Well, I guess, first of all, for any general meeting, whether it's COVID impacted or not, have a look at your rules. Your rules set out what you can and can't do in relation to AGMs as a starting point. And I think first thing to check is that, particularly if you're under restrictions, and obviously at the time of this recording, we've got stage 3 restrictions in regional Victoria, stage 4 restrictions on social gatherings in metropolitan Melbourne, that potentially an in-person AGM isn't possible. And so you've got really 3 options. We can do it via teleconference, video conference, or other means of electronic communication. Most rules allow proxy voting, and of course there's always the option to apply for an extension of time, particularly if you're coming up to deadline. And so really the first stop is, do your rules prevent any of that happening? And that might guide you down that path. And I think the other important thing is, particularly if you're thinking about using electronic communications, just to make sure that you got your quorum right. Some particularly old constitutions talk about people being there in person only, constituting a quorum. I think we'll have some flexibility this year around what in-person means, and it may be worth getting some advice, or at least having a conversation internally about appropriate governance. The key message about any AGM, particularly one that's being run by electronic means, that members can clearly and simultaneously communicate with each other and participate in voting in particular, and hopefully discussions as well.
Perfect. And then I suppose once you make that decision, if it is going to be an online AGM, are there any other kind of changes that you can see in terms of holding the meeting? I suppose you typically still need to go through the same notice requirements, setting that out within the time limits as well.
Yeah, I think the 2 things we've talked to clients about really is around, yes, you still got to follow your same time frame limits that you have in place normally, but to include in the, first of all, to have a think about what sort of platform you want to use. There are a bunch of different online platforms available, and choose one that suits your needs and takes account of your membership base and the sort of access that they have. You may need to provide multiple options there as well, both from a video conferencing perspective and also teleconferencing. And then make sure you include the right details so people can actually get in. They know which link to click, and can get in and participate.
Yeah, perfect. We've seen a couple of clubs and organisations being creative with their online AGMs as well. They kind of use it as an opportunity to, whether it's put on a webinar or some other session that follows on. Is there anything, I guess, you've seen and some benefits that you can see from having online AGMs?
Oh, absolutely. We've seen, funnily enough, AGMs are pretty dry, boring matters for a lot of organisations, and we've often really enjoyed going along to those AGMs in the past, where organisations have, in a sense, talked about a little bit more than just the formalities of the AGM and talked about what they've done for the year. So, I mean, we've seen a bunch of organisations that have, taken the by the horns, as it were, in COVID and said, hey, let's reach out to more members. And we've actually seen participation up, attendance up, and really the ability to use this as a really great communication tool for members. I think a lot of people will consider using the electronic means of communicating with their members, even when it's possible to have in-person AGMs in the future.
Absolutely. And you mentioned earlier the governing documents for organisations. Some clubs might look to change them, or some clubs might not know how to interpret their governing documents. Obviously, at Harwood Andrews, your first port of call in terms of dealing with those kind of inquiries. Any tips for clubs that might be looking to potentially change their documents or get some understanding of what it all means?
One of our regular conversations with clients is sporting clubs and other not-for-profits coming in and having trouble deciphering very old rules, particularly in the incorporated association space. If you've got rules that date before 2012, when the Reform Act came in, you are going to definitely be out of date, and actually what you're obliged to comply with is probably not in compliant with the Act. Always a good opportunity to come in and have a chat about what options are available, but also always happy to provide some guidance on wording.
Perfect. And last one, I know Consumer Affairs and ASIC have been fairly active in terms of putting out resources for clubs. Is there any other resources you've seen or conversations you've had in terms of clubs being able to actually look online and find some things that might be able to help them?
Look, they're the two places to start. If you're an incorporated association in Victoria, go to Consumer Affairs. They've got a good summary of the options available for clubs, including a specific form that you use to get an extension to your AGM. And if you're a company limited by guarantee, then ASIC has provided some good relief and some good guidance on holding electronic meetings and the relief that they're providing for organisations to comply with the timeframes in particular of holding AGMs.
Perfect. Thanks for joining me, Paul. Short and sweet with this one, but if there's any inquiries that clubs have out there, by all means, if you want to get in touch with us, we can put you in touch with Paul and the team at Harwood Andrews. But thanks again, Paul.
Good stuff. Thanks, Jesse. Lovely to chat.